How would you like to come home to a bartender who will fix you any cocktail you want?
I'll have an old-fashioned.
I'll have a margarita.
Now you can with the new Bartesian Duet home cocktail maker. The new Bartesian Duet, Bartesian's most compact cocktail maker, crafts premium cocktails at the touch of a button. Choose from over 50 different cocktails. You'll always get freshly mixed, perfectly balanced cocktails with the Bartesian Duet cocktail maker. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Entertaining? The Bartesian Duet is ideal for parties. No need to stock all kinds of mixers for complicated recipes. Every guest gets the cocktail of their choice in seconds. Bartesian makes a wonderful gift for anyone who loves a fine premium cocktail. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Hurry, offer ends soon. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail, bartesian.com/cocktail.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop-off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
Welcome to the Wellness Transcription Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Patrick Gurley. Are you guys ready to grow together in our understanding of all things health and wellness? If so, you found the right podcast for you. Each week, we will give you access to evidence-based nutrition and lifestyle content that you can use to help improve the long-term health and wellness goals for you and your entire family. You can find us on any of your favorite podcasting platforms, so please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the show so you don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes or special guest interviews. Now let's get into today's episode. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Wellness Transcription Podcast. It's been a minute since we've had a show out, and I apologize for that. But to make up for it, I have got a wonderful guest on who's a true expert in the field and a not only a friend, but a true mentor of mine that took me under his wing during pharmacy school and really pushed me to kind of stay on the cutting edge of where science is going. So without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to Dr. Ryan Yates. A true pioneer in the field, and just a great all-around guy. Ryan, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward to this. So as you know, my background was for many years as a professor, a tenured full professor at the University of Tennessee College of Pharmacy, and where my research focused primarily in the area of inflammation, so animal models and discovery and traditional academic drug discovery. And then, before that, when I was in pharmacy school, so that's my background. I have a pharmacy degree and a PhD degree in clinical pharmacology. While I was in pharmacy school, I had an opportunity to do a lot of pharmacogenetic research while working at St. So did a lot of interesting polymorphism, genotype screening, assay development, and really enjoyed that. And then, as I said, when I finished pharmacy school and then PhD and stayed on as faculty there at the University of Tennessee College of Pharmacy. And then in 2019, I retired and moved my laboratory, my research to the National Center for Natural Products Research, where I do a lot of work with your esteemed father, Dr. Bill Gurley.
Yeah.
And he and I run a phase 1 human clinical center there where we do a lot of human pharmacokinetic work focused on dietary supplements. It's a really hot area right now, understanding the pharmacokinetics and oral dosage forms and all those pharmacy-related things that pharma has dealt with for years. And as pharmacists, we really hadn't thought much in the natural product world, but all that's changing. It's an exciting time to be in the natural product space. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, I got into, as you know, artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence can be utilized in the discovery space. And for me, the transition, in addition to retiring from Tennessee, that transition was from a discovery, really more for a discovery sake to discovery for a commercial application sake. So I've been doing a lot of work in the last 5 to 10 years on translating a lot of the work that we're doing in the laboratory into commercially viable science, evidence-based products. I think that's really where the interesting world of natural supplements is going, particularly with the Federal Trade Commission's recent, meaning December of 22, statement about the requirement for, hey, if you're going to make a structure function claim for a dietary ingredient, you need to back it with a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So it's a really exciting time in the natural product space. And so that's what I've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years, applying artificial intelligence and doing discovery, particularly in the diabetes space. And, I've talked a lot about what's come out of that and the supplement that my group has developed. We've commercialized just in the marketplace. Exciting time. We just got notice of allowance of our first patent a couple of weeks ago from the USPTO, the U.S. Patent Trademark Office. So that's really exciting as well. And finishing up our first clinical trial with that product and getting ready to commence our second trial with that. So that's sort of a little bit of background of what I do and where I've been in the last 20 to 25 years in the space. I do think it's worth noting that, I think sometimes in science and research, when we make discoveries, that we hit a brick wall, especially when trying to translate things out of the laboratory, particularly in the natural product space. We can discover, I'm being hypothetical here, you discover a cure for cancer, but it may be in a plant that doesn't doesn't scale. And so you don't have the opportunity to really do that. We did some really interesting work a couple of years ago, and I'll continue that at some point with America's caffeine-containing plant Yopon, but ran into difficulty with the supply chain. So I started working with a really interesting group called Ag Launch, a nonprofit group out of Memphis, Tennessee. And so I'm doing some volunteer work with them. They're promoting specialty crops and how we move away from this commodity-based agriculture, focus on regenerative agriculture. And where that goes is making now discoveries in the laboratory and then being able to work with field trial specialists to develop supply chains for that. That's sort of what we look like in the future. So that's sort of a broad spectrum of area and interest, and there's a lot of depth there as well. So I'm kind of going to flip it back to you and say, where would you like to dive in? Where do you think your user or your listeners would like to hear about?
There's a lot to unpack in there, and I feel like there's 4 or 5 different topics we could easily spend hours talking about there. I think what's interesting for me, and I'll just say this, when you came to, when I first really got to know you back in pharmacy school, when I was coming up with the business plan idea for trying to translate wellness and genetic testing and all that stuff into a pharmacy type aspect. My dad, I remember asking him and kind of saying, this is where I'm interested. This is what I want to try to do. And he was like, talk to Ryan. I was like, okay, I'll talk to Ryan. And then literally within a few minutes of talking to you, it's just, you could tell there's just, it's beyond what I would have ever thought a scope of someone like me would be in. I thought I'd just be a typical retail pharmacist doing retail pharmacy things. And then you've really encouraged me to kind of push the boundary there as far as where this field goes. I think the first part of your background, your extensive background, that is, of where I'd like to dive in first is really just how, I guess we sell a lot of supplements at our store. And I think there's a basic kind of assumption in the supplement field that there is all this research that's already been done. That's why these formulations look the way that they do. I don't ever really get questions that often in my day-to-day work with supplements about clinical trials and stuff that back up their evidence. People just assume that that's already done. So I guess let's just briefly touch on, I don't even say briefly, but go into what it takes to kind of undergo a clinical trial for a dietary supplement. What are kind of some of the hoops that you have to jump through to get that type of study going? And then I guess my second question to that, which kind of bleeds into it, would be, you talked about the product. I'm very familiar with the product that you guys have come up with. Why that product? Why did that start? What interest got you into pushing that product as opposed to the Yopon Holly product that you'd mentioned that I'm also familiar with? So I guess just kind of give us an idea of how all that comes to be, and then how you take that laboratory data and then translate it into a patent that then the patient can be fully invested in and understand just all the science that went into it.
Wow. So there's a lot there, and I'll try and take it in the sequence that you asked, which is the first is really sort of focusing on clinical trials and how that requirement is different than historical. And by historical, I mean over the last 30 years. As your listeners know, the regulations around dietary supplements, one of the things that makes me wince as a pharmacist, pharmacologist, and natural product guy is when people say that supplements are not regulated. As you and I know, they are extremely regulated. And oftentimes it's on the enforcement side just due to sheer numbers and the number, unfortunately, of bad actors in the space that makes it seem sometimes unregulated. But again, as you know, the regulations are laid out very clearly in the so-called DSHEA, or the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act of 1994. And when that came out, it defined a dietary supplement, a dietary ingredient. It defined how these products should be manufactured under so-called CGMP. This is the language that big pharma lives by, right, in terms of just the rules and regulations around just producing something to be put into a bottle. And what lagged in the regulations was, well, what did you need to provide as far as evidence to substantiate your so-called structure function claims? And that may be a new term for some of your listeners, but this concept of structure function claim would be, for example, promotes healthy blood sugar. And what you see is the reason people use language different than the pharmaceutical world is because, right, that's what that label's on there or your bottles, right, which is that this product is not proven to or allowed to be talked about in terms of diagnose, treat, mitigate, or prevent a disease. Those are so-called disease claims. So where I'm going with that is when you start talking about how do I substantiate a structure function claim in a human clinical trial, it's unlike the typical pharmaceutical trial where, okay, my endpoint is lowering cholesterol for a statin and how that relates to long-term morbidity and mortality, but more disease type claims. When you do a supplement human clinical trial, you have to be very clear and careful not to promote your product and interpret the results in the context of that treat, mitigate, prevent disease. And so you go back to your sort of definition in the DSHEA Act of a structure function claim. What is it you're trying to modulate in the body? And how does that relate to a disease without directly linking it? Because you're not doing a clinical trial under a so-called new drug application or investigational new drug application, right? The traditional pharma path. Now, I'll take a quick aside there because oftentimes even people expert in the field aren't aware that there's actually a provision, a pathway within the Food and Drug Administration to approve disease claims, treatment claims for botanicals. It's so-called botanical drug approval route. And so there have been literally thousands of INDs, investigational new drugs, for natural complex substances for the treatment of disease, but only a couple of natural products have actually made it through the process into the marketplace. We can talk at length about why that is. That'd be a discussion for another day. But the bottom line is that's your typical disease claim. But back to the clinical trial side is, let's say that you are, in my case, very interested in the liver. So why, as a pharmacist, healthcare practitioner, researcher, am I interested in the liver? Well, it's really interesting how the medical community, the medical education has become so compartmentalized, specialized, that we lose sight that we're treating patients. And that hit me in the face this past week when my wife, it's her mother, in other words, my mother-in-law, is she was needing to have to be seen by a cardiologist. And so this was trying to get a cardiologist, finally got a cardiologist. And then, this guy or gal is a valve cardiologist. You need somebody that's an atrial fib
Yeah, you need
cardiologist. And so
you need a specialist for a specialist. Yeah. I think that's definitely tricky. It's hard to just, PCP, usually it used to just be referral to a cardiologist. Hey, this isn't a really crazy problem we got going on. Here's what we'll do. Now it's, I don't know anything about the abnormal arrhythmias. To your point, let me get you to this guy. I can definitely see where the frustration and the bills then add up too on top of that. So I definitely share your sentiments there.
Yeah, well, bringing that back to the liver is, if you're a cardiologist, it's all things heart. If you're a pulmonologist, it's all things lung, and go on at length, right? But what we know is that through clinical research and basic research, there is oftentimes a common thread that runs through those different end organ disease states. And so my research is focused on the liver as a contributor to chronic inflammatory diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And so to that end, my research looks at evolving, if you will, from, or devolving back to the way it used to be before pharma, right? We had the reductionist approach, right? You're typical, you have a target and a small molecule in general that modulates that target and gives an effect, right? A pharmacologic effect. But it's really that sort of reductionist, there's one pill, one drug for this particular disease. And it's evolving that to more of the systems pharmacology. That's one of the things that I wish I had more time to really talk about and educate people, is the concept of systems pharmacology. So my first...
How would you like to come home to a bartender who will fix you any cocktail you want?
I'll have an old-fashioned.
I'll have a margarita.
Now you can with the new Bartesian Duet home cocktail maker. The new Bartesian Duet, Bartesian's most compact cocktail maker, crafts premium cocktails at the touch of a button. Choose from over 50 different cocktails. You'll always get freshly mixed, perfectly balanced cocktails with the Bartesian Duet cocktail maker. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Entertaining? The Bartesian Duet is ideal for parties. No need to stock all kinds of mixers for complicated recipes. Every guest gets the cocktail of their choice in seconds. Bartesian makes a wonderful gift for anyone who loves a fine premium cocktail. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Hurry, offer ends soon. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail. Bartesian.com/cocktail.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
Sort of experience in this concept of systems thinking was in my first career, which was actually before my pharmacy career, when I was in the United States Navy and running nuclear reactors on submarines. And I was in charge of all the electronics on the submarine that were related to the nuclear reactor. And if you're at sea, if something broke, you had to break out the schematics and you had to figure out what was wrong with the resistor, this capacitor or whatever. And so I started, learned at a very young age how to think about the entire system as opposed to, I'm only focused on this resistor or this capacitor. As the analogy here is, I'm only focused on this receptor or this transporter. You look at the body from a systems pharmacology standpoint. And so I think that's where artificial intelligence, now bringing it full circle, allows us to consider the body as a whole. So you see some really interesting work coming out now in the application of artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, that says, okay, you tweak this particular receptor and you see this effect on the other side of the spectrum. And if you look at specifically what I'm interested in, where my research began 6 or 7 years ago in this particular topic area and working with artificial intelligence, is how do we approach diabetes as a holistic systems pharmacology problem. And I say diabetes where diabetes is, in my sort of mantra, is an example of a chronic inflammatory disease. And oftentimes in my mind, I don't differentiate. I'm at the mechanistic level, right? Molecular level. I don't differentiate between diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's, chronic heart disease, these sorts of things, because of those common elements that are linked back to the liver. And so what my initial foray into artificial intelligence told me is you need to understand polyunsaturated fatty acid metabolism, right? Your old omega-3s and omega-6s and, the diet piece of it. But you got to understand, in order to understand diabetes from a systems pharmacology approach, you need to start with polyunsaturated fatty acid metabolism. That's where I was pointed with the artificial intelligence engine. I was working with a fellow by the name of Rangan Sukumar, a guy who's in the tech office for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise now and continues to blaze trails in this area. In fact, he's got one of the graduate students he funds at the University of South Carolina is developing an artificial intelligence-based algorithm for food substitution for type 2 diabetics, type 1 diabetics. That's a really fascinating topic as well. But so where this all came together through the omega-3s is, we see all this literature about how healthy, health-promoting omega-3s are. And we know your prototypicals, right? Your EPA, your DHA, right? Those hardcore polyunsaturated fatty acids that are in our fish oils or our fatty fishes. We know they're health promoting, and study after study, it's equivalent, right? We give people, look at fish intake. We look at their fish oil intake. We look at polyunsaturated fatty acid metabolism, et cetera. And frustratingly, sometimes you'll see a connection to long-term outcomes. Sometimes you won't. So that really got me started down this path that says, okay, we know omega-3s are important, but why is it that when we look at omega-3 levels, there's no direct correlation between omega-3 levels and outcomes and disease states? So that started me thinking about sort of the systems pharmacology. Okay, yes, omega-3s are absolutely a critical piece to the equation, but there are other things. And the aha moment for me was 3 or 4 years ago when I read a paper that was looking at two basic elements and their relation to cognitive decline. And so, of course, they looked at, circulating omega-3 levels. Those with the highest quartile of circulating omega-3 levels should have a reduction, if you will, in cognitive decline, but they didn't. We know that vitamin B12 as a so-called methyl donor, we know methyl donors are really important for various metabolic processes and brain health in particular. And so they looked at vitamin B12 levels and said, okay, now the highest quartile of vitamin B12 levels in these folks should correlate negatively with cognitive decline, meaning the higher the vitamin B12, the lower the decline rates. They didn't see a relationship. But then when they put the two together, meaning the highest quartile of omega-3s, the highest quartile of vitamin B12, bingo, that's when the association popped out. It says, yes, omega-3 is important. Yes, vitamin B12 is important, but they're important together in a systems pharmacology way. And so that started me down the pathway of developing a supplementation regimen that would focus there. Now, I took a slightly different tack, and you can argue for various and sundry reasons, whether it's from a sustainability standpoint or cost or whatever, is there a different way to think about omega-3s and how we promote omega-3s in the body, right? So instead of giving a fish oil supplement, an EPA or a DHA, and the answer is yes. We absolutely can modify polyunsaturated fatty acid metabolism. And by modify, I mean influence polyunsaturated fatty acid metabolism with dietary ingredients that actually promote omega-3 formation from omega-3 precursors at the expense of omega-6 entities like arachidonic acid, right? In his pharmacy school, right? Arachidonic acid, everybody thinks, right, COX-2 inflammation, right? Everybody knows that arachidonic acid is, or I should say is taught, arachidonic acid is associated with inflammation. But arachidonic acid, right, it's not too much of a good thing. Arachidonic acid is really good for us. But because of diet, because of genetics, because of various and sundry factors, that we get too much omega-6s, too much arachidonic acid relative to those omega-3s, EPA and DHA. So how do we manipulate in a good way the body so that it produces more of those omega-3s relative to those omega-6s? Said differently, more EPA and DHA relative to arachidonic acid. This is, and then ultimately relative to all the fatty acids, whether they're monounsaturated fatty acids, saturated fatty acids in the body, right? And this so-called ratio is the omega-3 index. So my research focused on sesame seed oil, in particular, lignin in sesame seed oil. This lignin is called sesamin. And sesamin is the ingredient, if you will, in sesame seed oil that drives that preferential formation of EPA and DHA at the expense of arachidonic acid. And so you see sesamin promotes the omega-3 index. But again, that's only the first piece of getting the omega-3s to where they need to be. And so the next piece is, okay, how do we activate those omega-3s? So there's, for years, we have thought about omega-3s purely from an oral supplementation standpoint. Said differently, if we can just get a little more EPA and DHA into the bloodstream, then we can get those ingredients to where they need to go. So DHA, for example, to the brain. But that's not the way the body works. And so, well, if that's not the way the body works, then how does the body work? Well, it's really simple. And that is the liver is responsible for taking those omega-3s and other fatty acids, but particularly the omega-3s, and converting them into a storage form in the liver. Said differently, just because you have DHA floating around freely in your bloodstream, right? We talk about unbound fraction and have some nightmares for talking about pharmacokinetics, which I taught for many years, right? Unbound fraction, we talk about that. That is not what makes it into the brain, meaning the DHA form. It has to be in a transportable form. And the way it gets there, it starts in this storage form. So I'm going to throw out a techie term here, right? Nerdy term, lysophosphatidylethanolamin. So so-called LPE species, as well as phosphatidylethanolamin. So what your liver does, it takes those omega-3s and it stores them in the phosphatidylethanolamin form. So the so-called PE form, okay? And I call it the storage form because in order to activate, now think about it, you've got this storage form of PE. It's sitting there preloaded with these omega-3s by your liver. And it's sort of stuck there in the absence of further conversion to the active form. So here's a term that the listeners are much more familiar with. There are so-called phosphatidylcholines, or PCs, that when we convert our PE species, remember those omega-3s, here they are in the PE storage form. When they're converted to the PC form, phosphatidylcholine form, that's when they increase their potential, their activation energy, if you will, right? Our enzymology and our physics coming back, right? They're activated. And what's key to that activation, not surprisingly, is methyl donors. Vitamin B12, right? Many also have heard of betaine, another supplement that's a natural derivative, right? And betaine comes from our diet, a dietary ingredient called choline, right? Most of your listeners hear choline, you think acetylcholine. Exactly, the same choline, right? Dietary choline, at least acetylcholine and cholinergic synaptic transmission, exactly. But it's also converted to betaine, which contributes to that methyl donor pool. And so I'm going to take a quick aside here on the methyl donor pool because just within the past week, and I sent this to you a couple of days ago, there's a fascinating paper that was just published that looks at this concept of aging and biological clocks and what really is the difference between our actual age and our biological age. And what's shown very clearly from this study that's published, and it supports what's been done for the last 20 years in aging, is that methylation status of our DNA is the biological clock. Say that differently. Your methyl donor status, the ability to methylate your DNA, is directly related to your biologic age. As we age, that methylation decreases. either because they're in less methylation or the processes themselves that require methylation are starting to slow down. But the higher your methylation of specific sites within the DNA, we won't go into all that in this podcast, but suffice to say, in regulatory regions of the DNA, the more methylation, the more that you are able to slow down that aging process, right? So that is the current thinking. And by current, I mean within the last week of biological aging clocks. So how does this relate? So now you say, I'm sorry, you want to ask?
No, so I just want to make an important point. So we do, at my work, we do a lot of long-term care patient management. So we have quite a few nursing homes that we deal with. And you see this combination pop up over and over again. So a lot of our patients that have dementia or whatever they're dealing with, that's already well established. We're already at the point of cognitive decline and we're trying to slow it down. And I'm not kidding. Just about every one of those patients to a degree is on some sort of fish oil supplement, quality unknown, and some form of B12. Now, like it's like they're getting there, but they're not quite making the full connection. It's like, okay, we know these help. Let's just give it to them and see what happens. When in reality, I think what's important to distinguish is having the idea of getting on top of it now, knowing how it works as far as preventing cognitive decline, I think is really important, because a lot of times you'll throw those on late after it's already established and then just hoping it doesn't progress. But I think that's really cool. That's where my brain went. It's like, okay, I've got all these patients on these things already and we're not really seeing improvement. Why is that? You've already answered that question. It's because we may not be methylating it properly. We may not be converting that storage form that we're giving the patients, and we're not facilitating that phosphatidylcholine buildup. And then, if that doesn't work, the next thing you do is up to acetylcholinesterase inhibitor medications and just hopes that it doesn't get worse. Whereas what you're telling, or at least what I'm hearing, is that this is something that we should be focusing on immediately to not even have to get to that point. So I say that as it's very interesting that all of that's finally starting to get teased out in what you're seeing in these papers.
Yeah, so you said a couple of really interesting things that triggered responses from me. So first is upping the dose of the acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, and we know the downside of that as well, the upside and the downside. And so, as you point out, why we do that is because we don't have the acetylcholine, right, which is degraded by these acetylcholinesterases floating around in the brain. So we need to enhance the acetylcholine. So that's what I'll call the last piece of the puzzle, where getting the omega-3s right with assessment, getting the donors, methyl donors right with vitamin B12, and interesting enough, another very common natural supplement, dietary supplement, methylsulfonylmethane, MSM. And so my lab spent a number of years really promoting methylsulfonylmethane. And by promoting, I mean researching that as a methyl donor. And so where that relates to the biological clocks is one of my dear friends at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, Igor.
How would you like to come home to a bartender who will fix you any cocktail you want?
I'll have an old-fashioned.
I'll have a margarita.
Now you can with the new Bartesian Duet home cocktail maker. The new Bartesian Duet, Bartesian's most compact cocktail maker, crafts premium cocktails at the touch of a button. Choose from over 50 different cocktails. You'll always get freshly mixed, perfectly balanced cocktails with the Bartesian Duet cocktail maker. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Entertaining? The Bartesian Duet is ideal for parties. No need to stock all kinds of mixers for complicated recipes. Every guest gets the cocktail of their choice in seconds. Bartesian makes a wonderful gift for anyone who loves a fine premium cocktail. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Hurry, offer ends soon. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail, bartesian.com/cocktail.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off, and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
Excuse me, Igor, what he did was he showed that, yes, Ryan, that hypothesis is right. MSM, methylsulfonomethane, is in fact a methyl donor, but he showed it in the context of DNA methylation. Right? So now MSM, DNA methylation, biological clocks, you can start to see the connections there that Dr. Coderbush put together, approved some of the hypotheses that we had. And so now you've got the methyl donors taken care of. And the idea is you're starting to activate your omega-3s in this phosphatidylcholine form. But phosphatidylcholine is degrading as we age because, right, we know it's a component of cell membranes, and cell membranes are undergoing constant attack from inflammatory processes. So we're constantly having to replace phosphatidylcholine. Well, if you're not replacing it with the phosphatidylethylamine because you don't have the methyl donors, right, one of the things that you can do is, as you said, well, let's look at maybe acetylcholinesterase inhibitors from prescription, or maybe an old prescription that is a dietary ingredient, a so-called citicoline. So citicoline is a precursor for phosphatidylcholine. So the thinking in adding citicoline is to give you the ability from a different direction to restore or to increase phosphatidylcholine levels and reduce some of that negative pressure on phosphatidylcholine, which would then require chewing up the choline precursors and reducing acetylcholine production. So you don't need that acetylcholinesterase inhibitor as much. And so that's the mix that we put together and patented. So again, assessment for the omega-3s, the methyl donors, MSM, and the vitamin B12, and then the citicoline, adding that piece to really start to change phosphatidylcholine metabolism in the liver, so that we start to see all these other chronic diseases impacted. And so the link I think is important for your listeners is let's focus back in on this relationship between the storage form, PE, and the active form, PC, of these omega-3s. What study after study is showing across all chronic diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's, heart disease, even acute diseases, sepsis, for example, ARDS sepsis, and diabetes, is you get a buildup of PE species relative to PC. So if you think through that, right, that makes sense in terms of the disease manifestation. If I build up the storage form of the omega-3s at the expense of the active form, meaning the PC species go down, then I can't deliver the active form ultimately to the tissues. So that's what you want to do, is you want to restart that process. But here's the good news. It's really a nutritional approach. So we know that there are a number of things, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. There are a number of things that, for example, deplete our methyl donors. We know metformin is notorious for reducing
B12.
Vitamin B12.
Yeah,
levels.
it's one of the
Vitamin B12 is notorious.
And then you also I think, like, to the point I made earlier, that a lot of these people are supplementing with B12. They're not supplementing with like a methylated version of B12. So yeah, it's your typical cyanocobalamin, cheap, everybody can get it. But whenever I reach for that, at least in the patients that I've talked to at length on this same process in the pharmacy, is yes, we need to be methylating as well. So let's take methylated forms of these things. And also I ask every one of these patients that come in, hey, do you take any prescription medication? I may already know the answer to that question if they already fill with us, but a lot of times they're like, yeah, I take, a statin. I take, my doctor did say my A1C was a little bit high, so I take metformin, and I'm sitting here going, okay, you need a methylated B12 and you need CoQ10, like just off the jump, because we're already dealing with depletion of certain things just from the pharmaceutical side. So it's like you're just getting hit with negative after negative, and you may not even realizing it. It's like, well, I'm taking meds and I know they have side effects, but I don't think it has those types of implications.
Yeah. And now we draw a straight line potentially from vitamin B12 depleting prescriptions, reduction in methyl donor, and then go back to this concept of methylation and biological aging. It's not a great leap to say that some medications may actually be counteracting that methylation of DNA. Now, that remains to be proven.
Sure.
And so I'm not going to stand on the soapbox and say that's what's happening, but there's certainly a correlation there, an interesting correlation that requires some hypotheses and testing, but it's not a leap, so to speak. I think the other interesting thing, particularly in a post-COVID world, is, you've got these patients with brain fog.
I see that all the time.
That's often a feature of another interesting cardiology-related malady known as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
POTS.
POTS. I'm not a cardiology pharmacist. I hope I said all that.
You
right.
did. You did. We
you
have a few patients that have come in with a new diagnosis of that too. Like I'm seeing. It's interesting. All these terms. It's like, okay, people. I used to not have an answer for it because people come in. They got COVID or how have you? And they're like, man, it's been months and I can't. I get to about 2 p.m. and my brain is like just not working. And it's like, never felt like that before. And, who am I to say that that's not the case? Because, let's be honest, if you've lived with the condition long enough, like you pretty much are the expert on how you feel and what's going on there. So it's important to key in on those things. And POTS I've seen a handful of times, which I had no idea what that was. When I was in pharmacy school, it's a relatively new term for me. But when you see it coming in your door over, every now and then, it's like, okay, there's something's going on. And then, your science brain kicks in and go, okay, I've got all these things. They're coming in for answers. So I've got to be able to give them something that's rooted in science. And I think that's where your mentorship with me has helped significantly with helping my patients manage this stuff in a pharmacy setting, because who else are they going to go to that has these type of answers? Your typical PCP won't really be familiar with this process unless they're in it and they actively research it themselves. So it's a really important point you make there. I definitely see a lot of.
Yeah, well, it's the science link, and you make the right sort of direction there, Patrick. Let's use POTS as an example, where if you look at sort of the science behind what underlies POTS and the features of POTS, one of the interesting things that's coming up is that there seem to be antibodies against the specialized cells in the GI tract, our gastroparietal cells. And so those gastroparietal cells are specialized cells, which, among other things, they help absorb vitamin B12. So there's this thinking that for reason unknown, post-COVID, you've got these antibodies attacking these vitamin B12 uptake cells. And can that be contributing to what is known that there are vitamin B12 deficiencies in these POTS patients? I think another piece of that in terms of sort of the autoimmune or the immune response post-COVID, as we talked about this, is our adrenergic receptors. And there is depletion or attacking of our adrenergic receptors. And you couple that with the inability to methylate, right? So making adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, right? That going back to your medicinal chemistry, your pharmacology, and that's all methylation. And so you see all these things point to methylation, aging, disease, but it's only one component of the system's pharmacology. So that's why it's so important to, when you're talking supplementation to patients, how they can think about it in a more holistic way. And so as a pharmacist, I also think about sort of what's the cost ultimately to the patient. And, you and I discussed this last week. It says, okay, how do you look at the cost of a multi-ingredient supplement versus individual ingredients? Okay, the patient with diabetes, right? You got the methylation. Okay, here's a vitamin B12. Here's a sesame seed oil extract. You got all these bottles, right? We've all seen the brown bag events, right? We had to go to and all that sort of thing. But if you can compact that, and by compact, I mean aggregate that into a single supplement, but do it in such a way there's a rationale.
Sure.
And I think that's what is why in the healthcare practitioner space, pharmacists included, right? If you're not really deep in this world, is sort of this hit or miss approach and what we call fairy dusting. And so, yeah, what's the latest ingredient? Well, there it is on the label, but there's not enough in there it's like giving 1 microgram of your statin each day. There's a statin in there. But by the way, there's only 1 microgram of it. And so you see a lot of that. So those are the two biggest issues I have with formulators, particularly formulators who are not scientists, pharmacologists, pharmacists. And let's face it, the vast majority of formulators in the natural product space are not science and certainly not pharmacology people. A lot of good ones out there, but there's a reason why I don't file my own lawsuits if I'm suing somebody, right? I'm not a lawyer. And so, but I could do it, but you wouldn't want me doing it. So that's the other thing I caution patients is, right, when you're looking at something that is, quote, science-based and clinical based, and let's bring this back to your original point about clinical trials and sort of evidence-based, right? When you read a website, I was reading this morning, we're talking about continuous glucose monitoring and how fascinating it is in the patients and in our study, and it's not published, meaning it's not peer reviewed. So that's just an extra level of evidence that the consumer, the practitioner can look at and say, okay, at least this is peer reviewed. I can look at that and see what that clinical evidence is. And what we see sometimes in the dietary supplement world is that this supplement is clinically tested. And so there have been thousands of prescription medications over the years that have been clinically tested, but that doesn't mean they were approved, meaning they work. So it's language that we have to be real careful with as well, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's important to have that study result there so that you can really vet what they mean by testing.
Yeah, that's an important point you make because, someone that I'm very evidence-based, and that's kind of the whole point of the podcast, was really trying to sift through a lot of that. And I'm getting there. We'll get there breaking down some of this stuff. But yes, there's a big difference between, there was a study that showed this. And it's like, okay, well, can you explain what type of study it was? Can you explain what the outcomes were? What were they in animals? Was it in humans? Like there's all these other questions that people just don't know to think about. Whereas, I can say I tested it in my lab, but if it didn't work, I'm not really helping anything. But I did test it, but I didn't, there was nothing beneficial that came out of it. And again, I think when you have people, I think let's just be honest. If there were more people like you doing these in the supplement field and everybody had your similar approach, we would have a lot less supplements on the market. But the ones that we would have we would be able to show in layman's terms why it works and why it doesn't. And it's just, because going back to your brown bag, a point that you made earlier is like, yes, I could have a protocol that would help with, let's say someone comes in with cholesterol issues as well as post-COVID brain fog type stuff. Immediately, I know based on our conversations over the years, I know where to go. But if I wanted to get sesame extract, if I wanted to get omega-3s, if I wanted to get a methylated B complex to help with that, and then I wanted phosphatidylcholine on top of that and hit all the aspects, I've got 7 supplements there that I'm trying to convince someone to take. There's literature to back it up. That you've shown me that works, but it's like, I don't want to pay $200 for all of these things every month because that doesn't make sense. So it's like, hey, but I have this one product that costs this much. It has all your bases covered. We're good to go. It's like it's a win-win because you're taking a minimalist approach, but you're also knowing that there's no doubt that the clinical evidence is there as to why that formulation is the way that it is. And it's patented. Too. I mean, anybody could take a formula and add one thing to it and then say, oh, look, this is unique or proprietary to what we have going on. But you ask them a couple questions as to, well, where was your study published? Like you said, it was clinically tested. What were the outcomes? And it's like they'll start squirming and it's like, okay, but the layperson, your average everyday consumer doesn't know to ask those types of questions. Or if they did, who would you reach out to? So that's a very important point you make because a lot of times in the pharmacy world, I've seen it, not necessarily said to me, but it's been hinted at that like, oh, y'all just push medications. Y'all don't really try to get to the root cause of things because you just want to prescribe a medication to treat a complication and that's it. A so-called you want a sick type approach which I think is unfortunately kind of the all too popular nowadays, especially on like social media and stuff when it comes to anything pharmaceutical related. Whereas someone like you is a pharmacist by trade, knows all the absorption and it knows all the things to amplify and make perfect a dosage form for a natural product. That's not your approach. I mean, listening to you talk to this point, I mean, the listeners are it's blatantly obvious that you care as to the whole mechanism and getting it to what issue we have.
How would you like to come home to a bartender who will fix you any cocktail you want?
I'll have an old-fashioned.
I'll have a margarita.
Now you can with the new Bartesian Duet home cocktail maker. The new Bartesian Duet, Bartesian's most compact cocktail maker, crafts premium cocktails at the touch of a button. Choose from over 50 different cocktails. You'll always get freshly mixed, perfectly balanced cocktails with the Bartesian Duet cocktail maker. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Entertaining? The Bartesian Duet is ideal for parties. No need to stock all kinds of mixers for complicated recipes. Every guest gets the cocktail of their choice in seconds. Bartesian makes a wonderful gift for anyone who loves a fine premium cocktail. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Hurry, offer ends soon. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail, bartesian.com/cocktail.
Whereas, people just hear pharmacists and they think, oh, they just want to throw a pill at it. It's like, no, we're really I don't want you on medications. And if I can come up with a natural remedy to not have to even go down that route, that's what I'm going to do. We want what's best for our patients. So I think that's an important distinction I'd like to make, because yes, we're pharmacists, but I think the true pharmacists that are really trying to push the boundaries of where the field's currently at, like yourself, have that everything's interwoven, everyone's unique type of approach and mentality to things. So I think that's a thing that's really fascinated me with you and my dad and y'all's group's approach, is just how you're able to take the science and really apply it and make it unique, to where it's not just this cookie cutter type approach that really you're kind of not so sure if you had the clinical data to back it up.
Yeah. An excellent description of the sort of the overview of the whole process, right, Patrick? And I think what is, I'll poke fun at myself as an inventor and scientist for, 30 years, is I've come up with a lot of solutions to problems that don't exist. And so the focus now in my career is trying to come up with solutions to problems that do exist. So let's go back to, I think it's very important for your listeners, is to make that final connection to sort of the mechanism and the process to the disease-related phenomenon. So let's go back to the phosphatidylcholine, right? So we're taught in biochemistry, key component of cellular membranes, but now let's talk about phosphatidylcholine in the liver as a signaling molecule. Signaling molecule in the context of disease-relevant endpoints. So phosphatidylcholines are absolutely critical for constructing the VLDL molecules that secrete triglycerides from our liver, right? Secreting triglycerides from our liver. Why do we want to do that? Because we want to get those fats out of the liver so they don't build up in the liver and cause fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or metabolic associated fatty liver disease, whatever we're calling it now. So the triglyceride lowering effect of phosphatidylcholine is I think the other part of this is phosphatidylcholine, right, where it participates in this sort of lipid metabolism that we're more familiar with, is as a result of its metabolism, phosphatidylcholine, it's attacked by enzymes in our bloodstream. It is able to increase our HDL levels. And so we've got to have phosphatidylcholines, not only phosphatidylcholines, but those phosphatidylcholines that are laden with the omega-3s. We have to have those in order to increase our HDL.
Mm-hmm.
It is part of increasing our HDL. So now we got two disease relevant endpoints here, right? If I got good phosphatidylcholine levels and they're packed with the right ingredients, omega-3s in particular, I can increase my HDL. I can reduce my triglycerides. And, that's the other thing. We don't talk about triglycerides to HDL and their combination ratio. We spend so much time talking about LDL, but I would encourage your listeners to really dive in and start to understand this concept of triglyceride to HDL ratio. I think if you read the literature, you'll be fascinated, where it is probably, in my reading, one of the most relevant indicators of chronic disease, heart disease, et cetera.
For
right?
sure.
So those two ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, if you just Google a PubMed search and you look up metabolic syndrome, triglyceride to HDL ratio, I mean, there's hundreds of papers that are all linking it. I mean, I was talking to one of our wellness director, Radia, the other day, and she was very fascinated with metabolic syndrome. We have different approaches to certain aspects of that, but she's really gets kind of the biochemistry. And I was talking to her about that ratio, and she's like, oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the telltale things, super easy to calculate, based off labs if we're dealing with it. And she goes, I see it all the time in my metabolic syndrome patients or patients with obesity or cholesterol issues. And they go hand in hand. And you're exactly correct. I think that ratio, and then like that omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, I think is finally just now starting to get teased out in the literature. And as a person myself, that's where I start to really kind of look as well. So it's really cool that you bring that up for sure. Cause it's definitely, for the longest time, like even in pharmacy school, it's like, oh, fish oils, these types of things increase HDL. And then someone like me is like, well, how does it do that? And they're like, it just does. That's what the
There's the black box, right? That's
it just does. It's like
the liver is.
It's like, it's like, cool. That makes sense. We know most of the de novo cholesterol synthesis comes from the liver anyway, so it's not not a stretch to assume that there's something there. And it's finally cool and interesting to kind of tease out that mechanism. And I think you've done a good job of explaining that in layman's terms. And it makes a whole lot of sense. Like there's so many implications for that mechanism in fatty liver disease when you were explaining, these storage forms, you may just load it up all the time, but it doesn't go anywhere. Or if it does, you start seeing, triglyceride and VLDL go up. It starts to shun it down that other pathway. And it's like, no, we want to make it go this way so we can get all the added benefits of excess phosphatidylcholine that you've talked about. So it's really cool just to kind of finally have an answer to that question, because every biology course or pharmacology course that I had, when this topic of omega-3s comes up, it's like, well, how? And then no one could ever really give a clear answer until yourself. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think if you look at it sort of as a pipe, the input would be the omega-3s. And now we're talking about the outputs. The outputs are impacting HDL, are impacting triglycerides. But let's sort of bring it full circle. So as a result of increasing HDL, omega-3s and methyl donors increasing HDL, a side product of HDL production, interestingly enough, fascinating enough, is the actual transportable form of DHA. So in other words, remember we said over here on the left-hand side of the pipeline where you have all this DHA floating around in the bloodstream and it's not able to make it into the brain. When it goes to this pipeline and that last step where you form HDL, what comes out of that as a side sort of product is the brain's transportable form. So now I've got a form of DHA that when it passes through to the blood-brain barrier, there's a transporter there that sits at the blood-brain barrier that recognizes that transportable form of DHA, not free DHA, the transportable form of DHA, and pulls DHA into the brain. So now, if you don't send DHA through that pipeline and repackage it into the transportable form, then you can take DHA till you're blue in the face, right? And it's not going to do you any good. But here's the downside, is we know that too much of a good thing, anything, is not good.
That's correct.
And we know that when we get too much DHA, too much EPA, in particular DHA, in some studies has shown that DHA is actually cardiotoxic because it starts to replace other fatty acids and key membrane lipids in our mitochondria, our energy producing organelles, and they don't work as efficiently. And it's because the DHA, because there's so much of it, replaces these other key fatty acids. So that's the other reason why that sometimes as humans, right, we think we know how the body works and we see an endpoint, right? I've got to get DHA into the brain, so let's give more DHA, but we don't give the body enough credit for it. They're regulated processes, and there's a reason why, right? You can eat, fish once a week and still have plenty of DHA if you've got all the other dietary ingredients there to help your liver do what it's supposed to do, right? Which at the end of the day, I always remind myself, these are dietary supplements. Let's go back to 1994, DSHEA. They're designed as nutritional supplements, meaning supplements to our diet. What are we not getting in our diet that we should be getting in our diet?
Correct.
And so that's the other thing to keep in mind is, right, from a pharmacist perspective, when you're talking with patients, and right, we're really good at patient, take this antibiotic with food, without food, or oftentimes we talk about with food because they're going to upset your stomach. But we don't think about supplements, right? If you think about it in the context of their supplement to our food and our meal, then it rolls off the tongue. Be sure and take this with food because it's a nutritional supplement. And what that means is that your body produces through physiologic processes the necessary chemistry to absorb all those things that are in these dietary supplements. And if you don't eat, then you don't have that secretion of these, lecithins, et cetera, these solubilizing agents in the small intestine, and they just pass right through the GI tract. So yeah, I would give that as a take home for your listeners today too, is I can't think of a single reason why you would give a nutritional supplement not in the context of a meal.
That's extremely.
And I'm always open to being proven
extremely
wrong,
important. Yes, that's extremely important. I always recommend any supplements with food, and not just, if you take 15, 20 supplements. I know a lot of people that take a lot of stuff, and if they take it on empty stomach, it's like, I feel nauseous and terrible. It's like, just eat with it, you'll be good. And it's like, and then, we haven't even gotten into the part that most of these extracts and large proprietary blends with all these ingredients just kind of thrown in, so to speak. Now, some of them may not just be thrown in. There might be a reason why they're all combined. Let's play both sides. But that dissolution profile of those certain extracts may not be very good. And you may be taking it and it's not getting absorbed, which is a whole other thing that I think is what pharmacists bring to the table, is just, especially you guys at the NCMPR, is y'all are really good at going, my dad says this all the time. I'm like, Dad, what do you know about this supplement? I haven't heard of it before. He goes, doesn't work. Doesn't matter. It doesn't get absorbed. And I'm just like, okay. And he's like, yeah, I mean, you could take bottles of it. It's not going to get absorbed. And it's one thing that, and that's, if you tell that to a patient that's been on it for a long time, it's really frustrating. They're like, well, why didn't anyone tell me that? It's like, it's not very many people know. And they think, oh, it's a natural source. Of course it's going to get absorbed. Why wouldn't it? It's like, it's just not, that's not how chemistry works. It's a very important distinction, but yes, definitely eating with it. And again, I tell people that all the time too, that supplements are meant to supplement a proper diet. So not only do we you can take supplements till you're blue in the face, and yes, some needles will improve, but again, we've got to also facilitate that through those same principles through dietary management as well. Another point I'll make briefly, because I just thought of this when we were talking about, so your product centers around sesame extract, which is from sesame seeds, there's kind of a push now, and I'm not sure if you're super familiar with it, like all seed oils are the cause of all of chronic problems now. That narrative's starting to get pushed, and to a degree I can kind of get it, but sesame seed and all these different, seed oils do have large clinical benefit when you look into the research for them, especially if amounts are controlled, you're not overdoing it, just like anything else. So I think if the listeners get nothing out of it, if you're on the anti-seed oil type of train, I think Ryan's proved that the sesame seed oil part of that shouldn't be included at bare minimum. So I just want to make that quick point, because as humans, we tend to fall into these camps of things like, oh, you know what? Yes, these seed oils, there's negative clinical benefits if overconsumed. So now they're all bad. It's like we take one thing and then we just go too far with it. Same thing with carbohydrates. It's like, oh, yes, if you eat too many of them and if you don't eat the right types, and we're not really watching that, a lot of people will go, okay, all carbs are bad. You don't need any of them. So it's like, when you talk to the actual scientists and people say, yes, balance and moderation is important, you got it. There's definitely truth to it. I don't think we're really going to get anywhere in the field of science if we all just take these, if we all just hop into these camps where it's like an all or nothing type approach, if that makes sense. I don't know if you share any of those sentiments, but I just want to make that quick point because that's just what I was thinking about it when you were talking about it.
What I find fascinating about the seed oil is, particularly sesame seed oil. I mean, it's been around since time immemorial, I think is the term I'm looking for. And the reason why it was so easy to transport is because of its high antioxidant activity. And so it was utilized for thousands of years. And so as a result of that, the listeners should know that there are a few people out there who, interesting enough, have sesame seed allergies. And so I think it's been estimated there may be as much as 1 million people in the world that have a sesame seed allergy. So we're very careful to put that on the bottle, right? So it's like anything else. There is a generalization about health benefits, but you can always find a situation or scenario where it's not the right thing for a specific patient. And in that case, you have to have alternatives for those individuals. But I think if you can come up with something that is generalizable for your patients and gives them an option, right? We're both pharmacists. And there's a tremendous amount of benefit that comes from prescription medications. I would never say that there is not. There's a tremendous amount of harm and misuse that comes from that as well. So we have to balance.
Exactly.
And our patients know that.
How would you like to come home to a bartender who will fix you any cocktail you want?
I'll have an old-fashioned.
I'll have a margarita.
Now you can with the new Bartesian Duet home cocktail maker. The new Bartesian Duet, Bartesian's most compact cocktail maker, crafts premium cocktails at the touch of a button. Choose from over 50 different cocktails. You'll always get freshly mixed, perfectly balanced cocktails with the Bartesian Duet cocktail maker. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Entertaining? The Bartesian Duet is ideal for parties. No need to stock all kinds of mixers for complicated recipes. Every guest gets the cocktail of their choice in seconds. Bartesian makes a wonderful gift for anyone who loves a fine premium cocktail. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Hurry, offer ends soon. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail, bartesian.com/cocktail.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop-off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
And our patients want to be as natural as possible. And I think it's incumbent upon us as pharmacists to give them the education and the knowledge that we have around this topic and say, okay, here's an option that you have. And I'm never going to push something instead of a statin, for example. I'm going to say, here is an option or a companion, something that, you never want to get between an individual and his or her physician, right? Because they know the patient best.
Correct.
But again, the patient at the end of the day knows themselves best.
Yep.
And so you give them the options to make the decision, an informed decision. And I think at the end of the day, right, that's who we are as pharmacists. Our job is to inform the public, and we're the most accessible, all those things that we've been told for years that we are. And that's why we have been one of the most trusted professions ever, is because we give information, but we don't typically have skin in the game, so to speak. And so it is a little bit concerning when, you mentioned earlier, people say, oh, you just want to push a pill. And if you're able to counter that with, well, you have options, and here are those other options, then you can make a much more compelling case, I think, Patrick, for you're interested in treating the individual and not selling them a prescription. And we won't even get into,
Yeah,
the cost of prescriptions, and do you make any money selling prescriptions?
Oh, dude. Yeah. I mean,
That's another topic.
I've told a few patients about that just in general, like, oh yeah, I can't fill that. And they're like, why? It's like, well, every time I do it, I lose money. It's like, and they're like, what are you talking about? That's not how business works. I'm like, exactly. It's not how business works. And it's funny. I was,
but unfortunately, it's how pharmacy business works,
it's just a mess. It's a topic for another day, but I may do a mini episode on those, even though it's just convoluted. But it's interesting enough, like tomorrow I'm doing an interview with another friend of mine who is heavily involved with Nimbus at the pharmacy. He's one of the co-founders. It's Dr. Richard Harris. He's an MD. He also has his PharmD degree too, which makes him like super unique. And he tells me all the time about when he meets with patients for lifestyle management is he'll go, okay, I don't write prescriptions unless it's like the alarm bells are going off. He goes, but if I can look at a patient's labs and see that we may not be going in the right direction, I've got to have options for them. He goes, now, it may be everything's lighting up red, not looking good. It's like, okay, we need to do a statin and some stuff right now. Or, hey, we're kind of trending there. If we don't manage some of these things, like these are the options we're going to have to take in the future. But for right now, here's 3 things you can do and stuff like that. So he's really pushing the boundary from a physician side of having options. And when we're all on the same page, like as pharmacists to physicians to patient, if we're all on the same page and have the same approach, it's only going to be beneficial. I find it harder when, and patients can attest to this, is they're like, well, I'll have a conversation with one of them, for example, and they'll go, well, what you're telling me is not what my doctor said. The doctor didn't even spend much time with me, let alone tell me that. It's like, yes, the doctor doesn't have the time to do that as well. So let's not just assume that the doctor's not wanting to do their job. It's they don't have the time. So I think that's another benefit of having a pharmacist. If I know where their physician's at, then I can take that extra time throughout the day and help kind of facilitate that process moving forward to where we're all kind of moving in the same direction. I don't like to, like you said, I don't want to get in between the patient-physician relationship. But if I know what that patient-physician relationship is and I can help kind of elaborate on things they've already talked about, that's the most important role, I think, as pharmacists that we can provide. Because let's be honest, if you're a relatively healthy individual, you may see your physician a couple times a year, for, let's say 15 to 30 minutes, maybe longer. But in the scheme of things, you may come to see me at least once a month, hopefully, if you're on a prescription or something like that, if you're taking supplements regularly. So it's like, I can kind of get to know you better, understand what's going on outside of a healthcare setting, and then help you facilitate getting good information, good out there, and have a plan of attack. So when you go back to the doctor's office, that everything's looking right. And then you can say, hey, I've been doing what you said, and my pharmacists and my other people that I see we're all on the same page, and it's only going to be beneficial for the patient at that point. So I think that's a really important point that you made for sure, in that regard. So let's get into, so you've already we've clearly talked about the benefits for sesame and all that stuff. So I know one of your other fascinations, and you talked about this in your introduction, is how you're interested in relating that to diabetes. So tell me more about, granted, I already know a lot of this, but tell me more for our listeners out there, how this applies more to diabetes, and then also where your kind of business ventures are going, if you can get into that, on how this will help diabetics on like a national scale at some point, because I know that's kind of how you guys see this moving. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then also because clearly, all the cholesterol abnormalities and diabetes go hand in hand, as well as all the liver stuff that we've already talked about. So feel free if you want to talk about that. I think our listeners would be really interested, because there's a lot of patients out there that are pre-diabetic and may not even know it, that are looking for these answers before they get that diagnosis, if they're going down that track. So.
Yeah, I'll start here in terms of the pre-diabetes. There is extensive, and I mean extensive, research looking at liver metabolism, phosphatidylcholine metabolism, and its link to conversion of prediabetes to diabetes. And there's one marker in particular, the so-called lysophosphatidylcholine, which is a metabolized form of phosphatidylcholine that is linked to conversion of prediabetes to diabetes. So again, there's direct linkage beyond the triglyceride, the HDL, the forms of absorbable or penetrating DHA, right? Is these biomarkers related to diabetes. So all that is to say that this phosphatidylcholine metabolism and the offshoot of that, the metabolites of that, are related to diabetes. I think where I would go next is, we talk about the triglycerides and what any healthcare practitioner that's paying attention to the literature, and I only say it that way because most are so swamped with just their day-to-day duties of seeing their patients, right? It's hard to keep up with the literature sometimes. But those that are able to keep up with the literature and have the time and energy are reading about fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's the scourge. And I think it gets lost sometimes, though, in the discussion of obesity and diabetes, and again, trying to put them into different buckets as opposed to trying to look at them holistically and seeing how we can impact all of those things in a more concerted fashion. And so I guess the greatest example of that is this whole GLP-1 receptor agonist in the context of obesity, and sort of, in my humble opinion, that's a train wreck waiting to happen. Because what the patients aren't told is that as soon as they come off these agents, the clinical trials clearly show that you rebound severely in terms of weight, right? It's just within a few months, and I forget the exact that we talked, but within a few months, you're right back where you were. So I guess what I'm going with that is something that if a patient wants to commit a lifetime to, that's exactly what that is. Okay, if you're going after GLP-1, if you want to use them to get you to a certain point, and actually you were the one that really sort of got me to thinking in this direction. If you want to use them to get to a weight, and how do you then sort of rethink what you eat and how you eat to keep you at a healthy weight? I think that could be a potential use for those, to steal your words from last week.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually, believe it or not, before we started, I was working on a script for the next a podcast episode I was going to do solo, and it was going to be basically everything you need to know about GLP-1s. Not only from describing what they do pharmaceutically or in a pharmacology sense, but yes, that was the thing that was startling to me. And I think if I remember correctly from the trial, I don't remember the authors of it, but it was showing they studied these patients out for a year. And I think by 12 months, they'd hit their weight goal was. And then I think it was within the year, within the year, they'd gained all their weight back plus some. And you see that time and time again with just about any dietary intervention, whether that be like a fasting, whether that be like a keto diet. Again, all of it, it's about consistency. Now, totally fine with, we dispense GLP-1s all the time. All the time. So I talk about them quite often with patients, but what I tell them is, once we get where we need to, if that's what helps you kind of facilitate doing things and helping with lifestyle patterns and stuff. So if you need to lose 50 pounds for you to be able to feel like you have the energy to go to the gym consistently, fine. But what do we do when those medications stop? And that's the big thing, is if you just treat them as the medication's going to fix all your problems, and then when you get off the medications, you've learned you don't know how to then keep that trend going. I think that's where people like us come into play. I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle, that it's exactly in your words, a train wreck waiting to happen. Because then guess what? If you gain all that weight back, what's all you know to do was, I guess I got to go back on this medication again. And let's be honest, these medications are not cheap. I'll kind of be brief with this, but on average, let's say you walk into this pharmacy with a prescription for Ozempic, whether that be now, if it's for diabetes, it's different. Insurances are more apt to cover something like that. I've seen copays really low. I've seen some have no copays. But for weight loss, since it's now an FDA indication for that, insurance are still not willing to pay the cost of that on a monthly basis for everyone who wants weight loss, because that's pretty much everybody to a degree. So you're looking at paying, I've seen with insurance coverage, I've seen copays $500 on average. the medication for cash is $1,500. So, and that's per month. So again, imagine being on a medication for 6 months, you're paying cash for it. So you're paying $1,000 a month for 6 months at $6,000. You've gotten where you want to. And then literally 6 to 8 months later and a year later, you're back to square one. And you got to do that process all over again. And I don't know about you, but that's very discouraging as a patient. And I'm just like, dang it. Every time I walk out the door nowadays, life is expensive. And it's just like, why does it cost so much to lose weight? And it's like, it's not the right approach. These medications are fantastic, in my opinion, for helping get that process going and make it easier for patients. But again, we've got to be waiting at the finish line to go, okay, we're here. We need to stay here. We don't need to go back to square one. So I think that's a really important point. And I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I think it's important for the listeners to understand that sometimes we can be pedantic, meaning professorial to patients. And by that, I mean, look, you need to eat right and you need to exercise. And if you eat right, then this whole obesity thing will go away. That's simply not the case. We know. In fact, I was just reading an article the other day by the guy who discovered leptin many years ago. And he was talking about that, yes, at the end of the day, you can't get past the basic input output, right? What you put into your body and how you get rid of that, you metabolize, right? Is a factor in obesity, but there's a mental part of the the obesity as well, right? Why am I eating what I'm eating? Why can't I feel satiated? And that's where these GLP-1 receptor agonists come in, is giving you that satiety feeling so that you eat less. So it's sort of coming at it from the mental side, but the manifestation is that you eat less, and that's why you ultimately end up losing weight. And so I think sometimes it's important for patients to understand that these medications aren't doing they're not fat burners. They're not going in and changing your metabolism and making you somehow some superhuman fat burner, right? Which is what we want through a pill. It's changing your sort of mental approach to eating, but using pharmacology. And if we think about that from just a normal physiologic process, is right the way, and I won't go into details here, it's too much to unpack here, but the way we are supposed to eat actually promotes GLP-1 levels. So it does the right thing, right? So the more processed foods, the pure sugar, these sorts of things that we eat, the more our GLP-1 levels are paradoxically, they're reduced. And so it's like this vicious cycle. Is the modern Western diet pushes GLP-1 levels down and tells us we're not full, so we have to eat more, and it snowballs out of control. And so it's important to really control that caloric intake. And again, not for this podcast, but hopefully for another, there's some really interesting technologies and concepts out there right now. One in particular, as many of us have heard of this concept of low glycemic index. And the way it's presented is that, you eat certain foods that are the glucose and glucose precursors are absorbed more slowly. So that's why you don't have the peaks. But the narrative now is much like a sustained release formulation we give patients. It's absorbed more slowly, but you still deliver the same dose. And so that's the narrative now in the low glycemic index world, is that, yes, you slow absorption, but you still deliver the same amount of calories. And my research and my reading says that doesn't have to be the case. That's a component of it, slowing it, but there's a whole other fascinating area in research and development where now you have the potential, emphasis on potential, and there's data to back it up, the potential to eat what you're used to eating, right?
How would you like to come home to a bartender who will fix you any cocktail you want?
I'll have an old-fashioned.
I'll have a margarita.
Now you can with the new Bartesian Duet home cocktail maker. The new Bartesian Duet, Bartesian's most compact cocktail maker, crafts premium cocktails at the touch of a button. Choose from over 50 different cocktails. You'll always get freshly mixed, perfectly balanced cocktails with the Bartesian Duet cocktail maker. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Entertaining? The Bartesian Duet is ideal for parties. No need to stock all kinds of mixers for complicated recipes. Every guest gets the cocktail of their choice in seconds. Bartesian makes a wonderful gift for anyone who loves a fine premium cocktail. And now, get our best deal ever on the new Bartesian Duet, plus free shipping when you go to bartesian.com/cocktail. Hurry, offer ends soon. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail, bartesian.com/cocktail.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure, all you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
Because we're all human and we like things that we like, and not derive the same caloric intake. In other words, you can potentially take a white bread roll. I love bread.
I do too.
Well, eat that same piece of bread, right? And then absorb a lot fewer calories from that same piece of bread without impacting the organoleptics and sorrel, the fancy way of saying it just tastes and feels the same way.
It's one.
And so as that concept evolves, now it changes the conversation. Now, from a science perspective and from a development perspective, we get to meet the patients halfway and saying, okay, you like this food. Well, have you considered a low glycemic index version of that food? Folks, that's possible today. And we just have to figure out how to make that market and understanding and educate so that we can start building more products in that area. And you alluded to it earlier. That's one of the most fascinating projects that I'm working on right now. Commercial projects is bringing technologies like that to consumer awareness so that they understand that they have options besides GLP-1 receptor agonists. And I'll stop there because I don't want to take us too.
No, you're fine. It's a very important, two things that's important is that's one part of the equation. It's people in the nutrition space don't really focus on. It's like, for example, I don't like the advice of eat less, move more. On a basic principle, yes, that's true. You have to eat less and move more, like to lose weight. That's true. However, that doesn't really facilitate any action. It doesn't really give anyone tips or advice. You're also not talking about the whole concept of food reward and how, humans act and feel after they eat certain foods. So yes, eating less processed foods and stuff is going to be beneficial. However, sometimes if you want to enjoy something, there's a food reward aspect to eating foods that may not necessarily be the healthiest for you. So there's all these different factors at play. And I think it's fascinating. Another cool thing you mentioned about the low glycemic index stuff is I would be interested from a nutritional side, and a lot of dietitians will understand what I'm talking about here, is I wonder how that technology, especially with the food types that you're talking about. By the way, I finally got my delivery the other day, so we're going to try it tonight with our meal tonight that I cooked for my wife, and just see how she likes it. But I'll be interested to see.
Can't wait to eat.
It'd be interesting to see what the effect, the thermic effect of those foods would be, because it does take calories and energy to break down certain foods. But if we're not absorbing as much of those calories to the beginning, that's going to have an interesting impact, I think, on the whole thermic effect of breaking all that stuff down would be. Because your body had certain, foods high in fat have the lowest thermic effect of food. So it just takes less energy to break those down. Glucose is second. And then I think protein, it actually takes a good bit of caloric energy and demand from the body to break those proteins down. So it would be interesting to see with these types of formulations of these low glycemic index foods and how they have an impact on that. Because there's really not, from an energy balance perspective, there's really not anything you can do to, or at least that I'm aware of, to really increase the amount of caloric energy needed to break down the foods that you eat, because it's a minimal part of the whole energy balance equation. There may not be any connection there whatsoever. It's just, that's an interesting thought that I had, especially with knowing the more intricate details that we're not going to get into about these products and why they work. But yeah, I think that's fantastic, is being able to have a food that may have the full amount of carbohydrates on the label, but you're only absorbing 50% of those calories, because and that's where the impact on your blood sugar is going to be. I think that's going to be huge in that space. So,
yeah, and I want to point out to your listeners, this is not hypothetical.
Correct.
In other words, they're data sets, right? I mean, I have a data set in my hands, human data set, clinical trial, right, powered appropriately, et cetera, that shows that this is in fact today. And so you diabetics and others that are interested in their glucose, and particularly their glucose variation, which I'll come back to in a minute, that's here today. What's not here today? So let's take your listeners 3 to 7 years into the future. Okay. Why do I say 3 to 7 years into the future? Because when we talk about blood glucose, we automatically think, right, first, especially those of us who have been around a while, our finger sticks, and we get a moment in time, a blood glucose level. Now that's evolved with the continuous glucose monitors. I won't advertise for anybody in particular on your show here, but or on your podcast, we'll just say continuous glucose monitors that are available for type 2 and type 1 diabetics. The concept there is twofold, right? And it's all pharmacokinetics. It's, if you're a pharmacist, right, think about this as glucose pharmacokinetics. It's about Cmax, right, our peak glucose concentration, but it's also that peak to trough ratio, that variability that we experience throughout the day. And so where we are today, we can't talk about glucose variability, because we don't have a ready readout unless you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor and you know someone who can interpret the data that's coming into your app, right? So it's very limited. We don't have the ability to interpret that data. And so that's not a good way to say that. We don't have the routine ability to interpret that data, and it's not routinely available, right? When and where is it going to be likely available to the average health conscious person, right? It's right here on our wrist.
Yeah, I've got one.
So in March, Apple came out with, they had just made a major breakthrough in continuous glucose monitoring.
I didn't know that.
Okay. So now they're able to do it. Absolutely. It was in March of this year, right? But the biggest problem, and they didn't say this is behind sort of discussion scene, but my understanding, I should say it that way, is one of the biggest hurdles is that the battery power is, when you're doing a continuous glucose monitoring, it chews up battery power really quickly. So that's a problem. Because our Apple Watch is right, doesn't get us at 24 hours to begin with, it's 18 hours best. But where I'm going with this is, right, when I said, take your listeners 3 to 7 years in the future, Apple said, right, and I believe it, and I'll tell you why I believe it in a minute, it's likely that is that they will have continuous glucose monitoring capabilities on the Apple Watch within 3 to 7 years.
Wow.
And so now in this world, as early as 3 years from now, you're going to have diabetics, healthy individuals, whatever, they're going to be able to show you, Patrick, their glucose variability. And studies have already shown, right? What's most important? It's that so-called coefficient of variation around your glucose variation. So remember your stats class, right? Here are your levels, here's your average level, right? Your mean, and here's your standard deviation. So you take those numbers and come up with a coefficient of variation, standard deviation divided by the mean. You keep that below 36, and that is going to keep you in an A1C range that is, I hate to state the word normal, but certainly outside an abnormal or inside a normal range, okay? And so that is available now, but not widespread. But again, in as little as 3 years, we have potentially that ability, if not sooner. Now, what's interesting about 3 to 7 years, because I was reading the Apple announcement, and I was asking myself, that's an odd thing when you're developing this, but continuous glucose monitoring devices have to be FDA approved. So they are, quote, medical devices. And so me, the curious guy, right, that sounds odd, 3 to 7 years, it's a medical device. So why do? I go and I Google, right, what's the average time to approve a medical device?
3 to 7 years.
It says 3 to 7.
Yep.
Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, right? I'm only a pharmaceutical scientist, but that's pretty darn compelling there. So now imagine 3 to 5 years in the future where some will call them influencer, you name whomever you would like to. Again, I'm not going to shill for anybody on your show here, but you kind of said, my glucose variability is 32. And it's because of, right? And then you're like, oh, well, what's my number? Yep. And now you're going to have an app for that. And now people are going to start saying, okay, like tonight, if you had a continuous glucose monitor, when you guys use this low glycemic index pasta, if you had data to prove that it reduces your peak and overall glucose variability, that's all you need, Patrick. And this is not magic. So one of my interested parties, we'll call him an investor in this technology, of low glycemic index idea, he did that, right? So he's a type 2 diabetic. He did his, finger stick, and he showed that absolutely his blood glucose barely moved relative to what he would expect from eating a pasta meal. And so he was convinced from that. And that's only a snapshot, right? Right. Again, back to the glucose pharmacokinetics, Cmax. Okay, that's important. But the variability, the peak to trough, is even more critical. We're getting there.
I think it's important too, and I'll go on this little side, because there are some people on social media and stuff that do have continuous glucose monitors, and they're in a situation financially where they can afford one. And they may not necessarily. I don't know how to feel about this, to be honest, because a lot of these people that are promoting, continuous glucose monitors, especially on social media, they are not diabetic at all. So they're just completely healthy, normal individuals that don't have issues with blood sugar control. And they're then making videos. Oh, look, I ate, Chipotle today. I'm wearing my glucose monitor. Look at how big the spike was. It's like, well, I'm sitting there watching the video going, well, that big spike doesn't scare me. You're a completely normal, healthy individual, and it went up and down, and we're good to go. I've seen people take like a snapshot in a healthy individual and then kind of promote it in a way that makes people scared of any type of glucose elevation whatsoever. So if I'm a diabetic,
can I stop you there though?
Yeah.
Can I stop you there? And I hear you loud and clear. I would ask you to think about it this way, and not the way the influencer's thinking about it, right? And I'm not agreeing with them at all, right? I'm saying that let's think through this process. We eat processed foods. Our blood glucose reaches a Cmax due to fast absorption and complete absorption of those calories, those glucose molecules, right? So what's the body's response? We get a spike in insulin because we had a spike in blood sugar. And we know in pharmacology that spike, right? It's like turning up and down the volume on your radio, right? Over a day or two, not a big deal. You do that over the course of a lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
Then that's when you start wearing out that pancreas. You start wearing out those insulin receptors. And so that's what I'm interested to see, Patrick, to follow the research. At what point does it become important to understand peak to trough ratios? Is it only important in your controlling blood sugar in a type 1 or type 2 diabetic? Or does that include pre-diabetics? Or does it include, a 10-year-old athlete? I don't know the answer to this.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the point I was.
He's going to tell us.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I hate to interrupt you, but yes, like I'm not in that camp of like, if you're not diabetic, you don't need this equipment. If you want to pay cash for one, and you have the ability and means to do that, I think that's fine. The more information, the better. But we do have to be careful with where, and we've already touched on this, you've said multiple times we're not there yet. So having someone who may not necessarily know how to interpret the data that they're seeing on their app going, hey, I ate this food and it went up this high, not knowing what the ranges really mean in its context, and saying it went up this high, you shouldn't eat this. Because then you're facilitating people to just start cutting out foods that they may not necessarily have issues with. That's where I was going with that, because I think, like you said, we're not there yet. And again, most people that are doing that, the average everyday person, doesn't quite understand glucose pharmacology or glucose pharmacokinetics and how that works, which I don't blame them. They don't need to know that. But I had no idea that Apple was working on that. I think that would be one of the reasons why I go back to an Apple Watch, just because that'd be cool for a science perspective to get the data. Like I have a Whoop, and I use it more for fitness and sleep tracking than I do anything else. But one of the big reasons I got rid of my Apple Watch, because I used to have an Apple Watch for forever, was I felt like I had to buy a new one every year, which is just about any Apple product. And I hated having to charge it overnight. If I wore it all day, I'd have to charge it for quite some time overnight, and I couldn't check my sleep with it. So I was just getting tired of the battery going out. So when you were saying that Apple was thinking about doing continuous glucose monitoring, I'm like, they're going to have like just an Apple Watch that just has that function on it if they want the battery life to not be an issue. Yeah. But that's cool. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, but I mean, right. So let's go back 30 years to when I did pharmacogenetic research and developing assays, and really working on converting that to the real-time aspect, so we could really use that from a clinical diagnostic and treatments perspective. The reason why it took a number of years and still requires a lot of sort of work is, to your earlier point about the interpretation piece, the FDA very quickly stepped in and says, these are medical devices. The results need to be interpreted by a medical professional, because there's all sorts of potential for harm. That applies to the glucose monitors, to your earlier point, right? That's why I think one of the reasons, maybe the primary reason, speculation, that the FDA considers them medical devices, to your point, so that people don't come out like your next, your whoever the next influencer is and starts talking about continuous glucose monitors and interpreting results, right? We need to have that in the context of what's the ratio or what's the rate, et cetera. So I think that will be useful.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today. Introducing Carvana Value Tracker, where you can track your car's value over time and learn what's driving it. It might make you excited.
Whoa, didn't know my car was valued this high.
It might make you nervous.
Uh-oh, market's flooded. My car's value just dipped 2.3%.
It might make you optimistic.
Our low mileage is paying off. Our value's up.
And it might make you realistic.
Car prices haven't gone up in a couple weeks. Maybe it's time to sell.
But it will definitely make you an expert on your car's value. Carvana Value Tracker. Visit Carvana.com to start tracking your car's value today.
But once it makes it to the Apple Watch or the Fitbit or the Whoop Band, my daughter Logan has a Whoop Band or something like that, a wearable, let's call it a wearable, then it becomes even more important for healthcare practitioners to be aware of its potential and how their patients are using that information. I say patients because they may not, right? If you got some 23-year-old young man or young woman doing it, they're not a patient, right? They're doing it because of what they see on TikTok. So there's the potential harm.
Yeah, I think that's a very important. I'm by no means anti any of these devices, but I think it's important to just understand what you're trying to understand with them. What is the data showing you? How does that relate to physiology? What changes you can make? Because let's be honest, that's another key thing, especially with diabetes management in an ambulatory care setting. When I was in pharmacy school, I went on I had to do quite a few of those for clinical rotations. And that was the hardest part, was someone who would come in and we would see improvements in their A1C. For example, I'll give you one. There was a patient who had a newly diagnosed type 2 diabetic who had an A1C. I want to say it was like 11 or 12. It was way up there. And we started doing lifestyle interventions with her. We did basic, like teaching her just the fundamental basics of nutrition that she wasn't aware of, and just trying simple things. She came back in, I think in 3 months, when we went and checked her A1C again, because you want to wait a while before you do. Make sure you check your A1C. You don't want to check that all the time. And it went down to like 8. So we're like, okay, we're getting there. We went from 11 or 12 to 8. So what are you doing? And we would ask her, hey, did you check what are your blood glucose checks? And she goes, oh, I just haven't really been logging them. And we're like, okay, why? Because it would be nice to see, because clearly you're doing something right. It's not like we're going in the wrong direction and I'm chastising that person or going, hey, what's happening? She was just like, I hate pricking my finger. She goes, it gets annoying. It doesn't hurt that bad. It's just annoying having to do it all the time. And if you try, I've done this myself. Like if just from purely experimental perspective, it's like, I want to know what what my patients are, what's it like? So if I wanted to map out, my responses to food before, 2 hours after, throughout the day, I'm having to prick my finger 8-10 times and it hurt. It's annoying. It's sore. And then I have to go, okay, let's see. It was this response should be around here at this time. Okay, cool. And you map it out. I'm like, this is tedious. Like, and I'm a healthcare professional. I know what I'm doing. I'm like, this is frustratingly annoying.
But Patrick, you just made the case, I think, indirectly for where I was trying to take you into the future if you're a pharmacy practitioner, right? There's going to have to be interpretation of that data that's readily available. And you've got to understand, I think that's a perfect opportunity for a pharmacist in, an independent pharmacy or ambulatory care facility setting or whatever to really step in and take control of that piece of data, work with that patient and his or her physician, right, to manage them. But that is, again, if you think about it's beautiful if you think about it from a pharmacist's perspective. And that's why I use glucose pharmacokinetics. There's nobody more qualified to monitor glucose variation than a trained pharmacist. Literally nobody. So there's a really cool opportunity for people who want to expand their scope of practice. And now I'm back on, now I'm back at UT. I'm lecturing to my pharmacy students, right, about opportunities and how you practice out, above your license. So, and by, I said that wrong, but you know what I mean? Not above your license,
with expanding the scope,
scope of your license.
We get told that all the time. And when I was a lowly P1 student, it was just like, oh, what does that mean? How am I going to expand upon for blah, blah, blah. And then I remember talking to you, the first interaction we had, where was I? I was in Memphis at the time, I think. And I was on a trip or something. You were out of town. And I remember meeting you in person. We had lunch together. I forget where it was. Oh man, where was that? We were eating outside. It was like kind of anyway, I can't remember the exact spot, but do you know what I'm talking about though? Like that first meeting where I met you in person.
I've tried to remember.
The restaurant's not relevant, but I remember listening to you and I'm like, okay, I get what pushing the boundaries of pharmacy means now. And then, the implications are even with, especially with the telehealth market that we have now and those platforms and the brilliance of the internet is like, you could have those on a platform, especially with where we're at with Nimbus and stuff, like that platform of having, scheduling a simple 20-minute Google meeting with a pharmacist or a physician that knows you to then go over those continuous glucose monitor results with you and understand what's happening. I think there's definite major implications.
We need to put that education program together for pharmacists and other related nutrition related. That is such a critical need. And again, when you put it in the context of you've got a 3 to 7 year head start, you've got a focus group now of type 2 diabetics, type 1 diabetics, right? That you can really get your feet wet because the avalanche is coming. It really is, right? In a good way. I don't mean to be serious. Like it's a really cool practice opportunity, I think.
I think, and I've told the podcast listeners this story with my background before, or maybe I haven't, but that was one thing I was a P1 or P2 student right before I decided to start my master's in nutrition too. Was one of our professors was saying, hey, like you needed to be able to not only answer pharmacy questions, you need to be able to answer nutrition questions too, and be able to relate all that to what they've got going on. And everyone else just kind of brushed it off and was like, okay, whatever. And I'm sitting there going, that's terrifying, what you just said, because I don't know anything. Like I know, I was a student athlete. Like I do know about protein goals and importance of eating enough energy, that kind of stuff. However, as we've exhausted my knowledge to this point, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to have to get more educated on this. So I was like, I'll just reach out to one of my dad's good friends, happened to be the dean of the College of Nutrition and Dietetics. And I was talking with him, got into that program. And one of the few things that I found out really quickly, and a lot of my advisors and Dr. Hackett would attest to this, he goes, Patrick, we wish we had more pharmacy students. And I go, well, why? Like, I was the only one that had ever done it at UAMS anyway, that was a pharmacy student and did this at the same time. Not to toot my own horn, but they were like, you answer questions to our clinical nutrition situations from a perspective that none of our dietetic students do. And I'm like, what do you mean? I already knew the answer, but I'll try to get them to get out there. They're like, the way you guys understand the pharmacokinetics and like the absorption and stuff like that, they're like, that's not in our wheelhouse to a degree, but we know it is. But having that perspective and relating it, those pharmacy drug principles of all of that to nutrition is very unique because they essentially work the same way. So again, it's interesting and fascinating that you bring that point up, because that way of thinking, if we can apply it to medications, I mean, why wouldn't it work the same way from a nutrition perspective? So I think it's encouraging, and I'm not saying that every pharmacist has to go get a nutrition degree. It's not what I'm saying, but it definitely, it brings another skill set to practice. So I think I'm all for trying to tease that out and how we can develop some sort of training, certification, or whatever program to where a pharmacist can understand what they're looking at, especially if within 3 to 7 years, someone's going to do it. Someone's going to have to do it.
Yeah. Well, so in my pharmacy school days, many years ago, the buzz term was therapeutic drug monitoring, TDM. TDM was everything, right? It's modern. And so that's where I go with this is just therapeutic drug monitoring applied to glucose. And now you don't have to go through a lab and take those and do these sorts of things, you know?
Yeah. Therapeutic drug monitoring for sure. I mean, that's still a term that we hear a lot in pharmacy school too. I haven't been out that long, only a few years, but that was something that they were really trying to push. And I find that the lay public and my patients that come in, they're not coming in asking me like foundational groundbreaking principles of nutrition. A lot of it's pretty simple stuff. They just want to know what to do, what works, what has evidence behind it, because a lot of people with certain biases may interpret clinical data differently to fit whatever nutritional approach they prefer, which is fine. But my big thing is consistency and what I can work with the patient to get to where they do it consistently, to where they don't feel like they have to do a lot of work. Because dieting, I don't really even like the term diet, because that implies that it's like a short-term kind of thing. Whereas I like lifestyle interventions because that's just part of what you do at that point. However, I think it's really important as a pharmacist to, with the interactions that I have with patients and the clinical questions that I get on a daily basis, is there's definitely a need for that. And again, you don't have to go into all the fancy science terms that, make everything kind of a little bit complicated, but knowing how to take that data and just make it simple for people, I think is going to be the key factor. Cause you can have that technology. And if Apple puts that out or when they put that out, not if, for their fitness wearables, people are going to have questions, and someone's going to have to stand there when the floodgates open, so to speak. And pharmacy's a perfect tool for it.
Whether you're in a pharmacy, whether you're in an ambulatory care setting, whether you're in Lifetime Fitness where I work out, people are going to have questions because it's going to be saturated. I see it. Because it has so many health implications. Now, the science is evolving, and I say evolving, there's a tremendous amount of literature on glucose variation and diabetes, both type 2, type 1, et cetera. So I don't mean to imply that this is at the research level. We're well beyond that. I mean, we've been working on this for 20 years. And so that's why I think it's a technology problem now. But once that technology problem is solved, it may have been solved. We're just waiting for the approval, speculation, but we'll see. Be there just ready and waiting for your patients and individuals that are just curious about health related, health and wellness. You asked earlier, right? This earlier generations, right, are thinking more preventive, whereas the older generations are so brought up in a treatment-centric medical environment, right? So this is and dovetails with that sort of preventive, holistic health and wellness sort of approach. So who knows where this is going to go? But if I'm, I think it's going to be.
It is, and it's finally, and I see it too from another angle is that like it's finally going to help provide answers to questions that just about every one of these patients has. Because right now, I mean, yes, understanding what foods and how they impact your blood sugar is extremely important. And again, I think it's also will help patients from a different perspective because I deal with insurance companies all the time with prescriptions. It's like, okay, yes, you could then with this continuous glucose monitoring in a diabetic patient, let's say you do just basic labs and they don't look that much different. Now I see the trends. If you interpret labs in a different way, it's not, oh, these are, fine. No, they're trending on the lower end or they're trending in a positive way, but they may not necessarily on paper look that much different. But then you can extrapolate and bring in that glucose data and go and look, here's their average. Like you could take that clinical data you're getting from that wearable and go, look, from 3 months ago to now, we have seen this change in their glucose numbers. And that could then facilitate like, hey, we're getting better. This treatment's working. Like there's other, it ties in another piece of the puzzle that helps that clinical data. So like, for example, instead of just looking at A1C, like I always like seeing, okay, well, what was their fasting insulin? Well, their fasting insulin improved. It's like, okay, great. That's what we want. We want less insulin equals less insulin resistance to a degree. So we need to look at that. We need to look at what the A1C is. We need to look at, you could even get into fractionated HbA1c too, but that's neither here nor there. But you take that puzzle, let's say your A1C went from 6 to 5.5. Now, 5, that's great. You're no longer pre-diabetic at that point. But someone may say, well, that's only a half of a point, that's only 0.5 improvement. But you can then show them, go, yeah, that may not look like a big difference to you, but look at the trends in your glucose numbers of that continuously. Look how it changed like this. It's a different frame shift. And then you have the patient not feeling discouraged about that small incremental improvement. You're seeing that small improvement looks bigger now because of that other improvement that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So it reinforces that you're doing the right thing. You're not anxious about it. You're not frustrated that you've been working this hard and you've only seen a little bit of an improvement. Because let's be honest, if you're anything like me, you're kind of tough on yourself being a former athlete. It's like you want to see those big improvements and payoffs and you feel good when they happen. But especially with labs and health and wellness, those little improvements add up significantly. And it's a mindset. A patient may think, hey, how'd your week go? And you could go, yeah, I struggled this week. I've maybe ate some things I shouldn't have. And you could tell they're kind of a little bit upset with themselves. And then you go, well, your numbers look great. And then look at these values. Like from a practitioner perspective, you can then reinforce that they're actually are doing good and they are making progress. So I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, but it gets back to the mentality part as well, is we assume certain foods cause our blood sugar to spike just because they're in sort of this food. Mm-hmm. But then when you consume them, and there are many examples, you realize they don't for various and sundry reasons. So then it starts to open up things that you thought you couldn't have that you could have because now you're not worried about blood sugar, right? So it affects behavior and food choices. And I think that's key from a nutrition standpoint is and the studies show this very clearly, wearing continuous glucose monitors affects food choices because to your point, you can see, that a continuous diet that causes spike after spike after spike is not good for you. So if you're truly interested in reversing those trends, then you're going to start seeking out those foods that are similar but don't give you right, but still give you that sort of food.
Or to your other point with the low GI pasta we were talking about earlier, and you expand that product line into something like, let's say, a cake mix or something like that, to whereas a normal piece of cake, that was made normally did this to my blood sugar, but I'm eating the same thing. It's very similar mouthfeel, very similar taste, flavor profile. Like there's all that there, but it doesn't do that same effect to your blood sugar. So then you're able to, when you do have those types of cravings, because we're all human, when you do have those things, and you want to reach for those foods, is you have another option that's not to where you don't feel like you can have to completely avoid that type of food for forever. Like I know a lot of people that say, you know what, I love bread, I love pasta, and I know I probably shouldn't eat a bunch of it, but I enjoy it. It's like, no, it's fine if you want to enjoy it. But like, if you're one of those people that likes to eat pasta all the time, why not have a pasta option that we know won't affect you negatively as far as its impact on your blood sugar over time. So I think that the implications for that, I think are really going to be interesting to see how they tease out. And I'm excited to know that you and y'all's group are on that. And I'm excited to be involved with it too. Cause it's just super cool.
Yeah. I mean, again, I just want to reemphasize to your listeners, it's there today. And without going into a rabbit hole, consumer education isn't there enough for big groups to pick it up because there's not a market. But there's a groundswell that has started. And I think to your point, if you get more people educated and you give them the ability to understand, why is it important? Why do I care? Once you get up, why do I care? Then the awareness is, you're going to hit that adoption curve, right? That log linear portion of that adoption curve. And then you're really going to see it take off, right? So you just got to, that's my encouragement to any pharmacist looking to branch out or starting out, is that don't think of diabetes as a dead end. So really it's really going to be an amazing opportunity if you sort of look into the future and see where those opportunities are.
I couldn't agree with you more there. It's finally, it's interesting, and it's going to take me a minute to kind of get my head around that, because for the longest time it's, it's a very similar feel to like, 10 years ago, I would have never thought that I would have ready access to my genetic profile to a degree. Now I have my whole genome mapped out, but like for $100 or $200, I can get a test done that tells me just some cool, interesting things I didn't know before. I would have never thought that technology would have been available 10 years ago, or let alone be affordable. So, and right now with continuous glucose monitors, I mean, Dexcoms, stuff like that, I mean, they're not cheap still. And then the ones that are cheaper, the sensors don't last for very long, maybe a couple weeks. I mean, they're good and effective, but again, some of them aren't continuously reading it. You have to kind of scan it every so often. So there are options, but I think it's going to be really interesting, especially from a pharmacist perspective on how do we then take that data that is now readily available and use that to then facilitate improvement from a clinical side. Because that's a task that I think is right for pharmacists to do, not because, I always want to see pharmacists do more and succeed, but it takes the burden of that off of a physician and the nurses, because to do that right and to look at those trends over time take time, and they've got more important things to do as far as diagnosing and doing all the lab testing and things that they do in there, to where, hey, I know we've got you on this, we know what your results are. Go talk to the pharmacist. He knows how to interpret that data. We're all on the same page. So I think it'll really help us expand upon interprofessional practice too, to where we can all kind of be on the same page. Because I know for a lot of folks, they feel like every provider they go to a degree is telling them something different. And I think that's a big problem in and of itself. But Ryan, we're approaching the 2-hour mark, which for you and me is not anything unfamiliar. I don't want to take up any more of your Sunday either. I know you've got a lot going on. I guess real quick, if there was not on anything we've touched on, are there any other things you've got working on right now that you're excited for? I'm not asking for you to go into like any great detail, but in addition to the Sesame and the lower GI impact foods, things like that. Are there any other things you're working on currently that you're also excited about before we wrap things up?
Yeah, my two big projects right now are this low glycemic, in addition to the what I'll call the fatty liver supplement, if I can link it to a disease. In addition is this low glycemic index. I see this as a revolution, and I want to be a part of that. So that's a big push for me right now. I think the other thing is maintaining sort of overlap between nutrition and dietary supplementation is this concept of nutrient density and where our agricultural practices need to change in the coming years. And the technology around looking at nutrient density is changing as well. So there is a prototype device where it makes possible in the future you to walk into your Kroger or your grocery store and pick up two squash, right? Here's this one yellow squash, or here's another yellow squash, and boom, look at the nutrient density of those two. You start to make selection based upon nutrient density, right? And so that's what I'm really fascinated is how do we get specialty crops to think more in the regenerative agriculture, soil health, but the goal there is, again, nutrient density. And the example I give very quickly is that we've gotten so good at fertilizer and creating growth, but what now I'm being hyperbolic here, but now I've got a corn stalk that's got 2 ears of corn. It's in the same ground, and now I make it grow so it increase 4 stalks, 4 ears of corn, right? Those 4 ears of corn in total still contain the same nutrients that the 2 ears of corn did. It's the same ground. So now you've cut in half the nutrient density of the corn on the cob that you're eating. That's the hypothetical sort of scenario we are, right? Just because we can increase our yields doesn't mean
it's the same. Yeah.
In terms of nutrient density. And in fact, it can't be, right? It literally cannot be because it's more than just adding fertilizer to the soil, right? It's so many vitamins and minerals, et cetera. And so nutrient density, I guess, is the other thing I'm really interested in and how that ties back to agricultural practices, particularly in the specialty crop food space.
Yeah,
so that's my other passion.
That's awesome. I've always been really fascinated into regenerative agriculture and farming and stuff too, because it's one of those things you just can't ignore at this point. But one of the biggest things that I see is like, man, that's awesome on a local level. How do you make it, how do you expand upon that, which is coming, I'm sure. But that's fascinating. And I've thought about it, but never really at that detail of like, if we're genetically modifying these things, I'm not a big anti-GMO person. I think that's fine as far as like volume of food and providing people access to food and stuff like that. However, to your point, if I take corn and I've modified it to where I don't have to really worry about the weeds and things like that, but I've also made it to where now we're doubling the yield of said crop. No one's talking about how do we increase the nutrient density in the soils, et cetera. So I never really made that link of, oh, well, yeah, they can grow a lot more wheat or a lot more corn. However, that soil, you're just increasing the demand of the soil. And then next thing you know, it's not yielding those crops anymore that were yielding 4 ears of corn. And now you have to go somewhere else and buy up more land. And then you just repeat the process over and over again. So that's fascinating to me as well. I'm interested to pick your brain more on that in another episode or just another conversation that we have, just as friends. But man, I really appreciate you being on here. I can't thank you enough just from a friend, mentor, pushing me to kind of do better as a pharmacist too, man. I can't thank you enough. It's super cool to be well connected to people who are really pushing the boundaries who in their fields. I think it's awesome. And the super humble guy.
Well, I appreciate it, Patrick. And I'm a pay it forward kind of guy, right? And that's what I tell anybody I talk to, and I'm honored to be considered a mentor, but I would tell people that say, hey, pay it forward, right? Make sure that those folks, right? Tell everybody you can, to read as much and study and learn this stuff and get involved. You and I have talked about this guy, Jay Phipps, right here, a former classmate of mine, or actually I think he was 1 year behind me at pharmacy school, but the things he's doing in the field of pharmacy and independent pharmacy in West Tennessee. We need more people, and they're out there. I said, but we need even more people like Jay Phipps and like yourself and what y'all are doing at Nimbus to really push those boundaries. Because right now, in one respect, right? So when I went to pharmacy school, the mantra was, you need to be getting out of pharmacy because this report just came out and said the pharmacy profession was dying, the jobs are going away. And when we finished pharmacy school, my wife finished her residencies, the pharmacy went through the biggest explosion in salaries in the history of pharmacy, right? So completely opposite. So anything you're hearing now about pharmacy is probably wrong.
Yeah.
And it just
I still hear the same. I heard that.
Okay. I'm not being critical.
I heard the same thing in pharmacy school when I got accepted, even from my dad. He ended up as like, oh, yeah. He goes, one of my professors goes, yeah, guys, it's the pharmacy field saturated. There's a lot of pharmacy schools. There's not many jobs right now. Y'all are going to really struggle getting out. I'm like, that was what I heard P1 year. And then when I graduated, COVID hit, and then it was just everything changed. And now there's a significant demand for pharmacists and pharmacy students. So it's like, it went full circle in 4 years. So
as a guy who's seen that over a 30-year period, I told every single class I ever taught, there will always be a shortage of good.
That's correct.
Pharmacists.
Yep, that's correct.
Never forget that. When you're getting into our profession, if you want to become the best pharmacist you can be, you'll always find a job. There'll never be a shortage, right?
That's awesome.
Never.
Ryan, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. It's been a long Sunday. You're a busy man. Tell everybody in your family I said hello. Give them my best. Keep my dad in line. I tell you that all the time. That's not an easy task, but someone's got to do it.
I was going to say I'm good, but
you're better than me. I live too far away now. But Ryan, I appreciate you being on. This won't be the only time I plan on having you back. Just whenever you want, just let me know. I'm really excited to see where all this goes. And I'm excited that you will, are allowing me the opportunity to get involved with you too. I haven't really gotten a chance to thank you for that, but really excited to see where this goes, and I appreciate your time.
Sure, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Wellness Transcription Podcast. If you wanted to continue to support the show, please do us a huge favor and follow, and leave us a 5-star review on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. Your support and feedback mean the world to us, and it also helps us to continue to bring you guys high-quality content moving forward. You can follow us on Instagram at the Wellness Transcription Podcast. That way you can stay up to date on all of our upcoming content and special guest interviews. As always, be well, and God bless.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today. Introducing Carvana Value Tracker, where you can track your car's value over time and learn what's driving it. It might make you excited.
Whoa, didn't know my car was valued this high.
It might make you nervous.
Uh-oh, market's flooded. My car's value just dipped 2.3%.
It might make you optimistic.
Our low mileage is paying off. Our value's up.
And it might make you realistic.
Car prices haven't gone up in a couple weeks. Maybe it's time to sell.
But it will definitely make you an expert on your car's value. Carvana Value Tracker. Visit Carvana.com to start tracking your car's value today.